첫 번째 세션은 세계를 바꾸는 기술 리더십이라는 주제 발표와 이머징 마켓에서의 우수 인재 관리라는 주제가 발표가 되겠습니다. 저장으로는 강태영 연세대 글로벌 융합기술원 연구 교수님께서 수고해 주시겠습니다.
Hello, good morning everyone, and welcome to this session. I'm very much honored to moderate this session, and we have today two eminent Evans here, right? One is Mr. Chad Evans, and the other one is Mr. Paul Evans. I don't know whether they are in the same family or not. I asked them, but they think maybe in the far, far end of the world, they should be in one family, right? And in this session, two speakers will have 35 minutes each to give us plenty of insight, and the rest 20 minutes for Q&A to two Evans, right? And I will introduce one each for the lecture, and then after 70 minutes, we will use the stage for the Q&A session. Okay, let me introduce first Mr. Chad Evans, who is giving us one of the most precious lectures on technology leadership changing the world. He is Executive Vice President of U.S. National Competitiveness Council, overseeing all programs and initiatives of the Council. Introducing just one example related with today's lecture topic, Chad built the Council's technology leadership and strategy initiative, engaging more than 50 Fortune 500 Chief Technology Officers. Now, let's welcome Mr. Chad Evans with a big and warm applause. Mr. Chad.
What does work mean in the 21st century? The world of work is transforming dramatically, and this trend strikes at the heart of competitiveness, long-term productivity and prosperity, and at the heart of my organization's mission. For those of you who are not familiar with the U.S. Council on Competitiveness, we were founded in 1986 as a nonpartisan, non-governmental organization comprised of corporate CEOs, university presidents, labor leaders, and national laboratory directors. Together, we work to set an action agenda for U.S. competitiveness. And one of the vital roles the Council plays is in analyzing major emerging economic and technological trends, their potential impact on U.S. competitiveness, and steps to address them. Today's presentation is about such trends and a preview of some of the analytical work underway at the Council on Competitiveness, identifying 5 megatrends affecting work and the American workforce and global workforce in fundamental ways. American workers have struggled over the past few years with a historically slow recovery from the Great Recession. However, long-term megatrends are also affecting the American labor force in 5 fundamental ways. First, the drivers of the U.S. economy are significantly changing. Second, competition to perform the world's work has intensified. Third, we are in the midst of digital disruption and the rise of machines. Fourth, multidisciplinarity is on the rise. And fifth, we are living in a world of rapid and accelerating technological change. And workers, whether they're in the United States or around the world, are all caught up in the eddies of this turbulent economy. Up and down the career ladder and across the workforce landscape, these megatrends are affecting the U.S. labor markets, the occupational mix in our countries, what people do on the job, and the skills they need to compete and to succeed in the global marketplace. This presentation will conclude with some reflections on the impact of these 5 trends in the United States and around the world, and in particular, an increasingly polarized labor market, as well as provide some insights and thoughts on the path forward, both in the United States and the rest of the world. First of all, the primary drivers of the U.S. economy have radically changed. In the 19th century, agricultural and mineral extraction drove prosperity. In the 20th century, mass production really involved and drove U.S. economic growth. And in the 21st century, innovation drives the economy. And intellectual capital, the talent, really the focus of this entire forum, is the most important resource in production. 35 years ago, about 80% of the market value of the S&P 500 was represented by tangible assets, brick, mortar, equipment, industry. But today, about 80% of the value is actually represented by intangible assets, patents, trademarks, research and development, software. And increasingly, competitiveness and market success depends on people working with these intangible assets and the technologies and the management systems used to create value from them. This shift in economic drivers from the tangible to the intangible places a premium on those workers who possess the high skills, the knowledge, and the know-how to monetize these assets through service and product innovation and through complex work. Another way to look at the transforming U.S. economy is to examine the major role played by knowledge and technology-intensive industries, a shorthand, KTI industries. Here is a visual representation and an elaboration of the shifting U.S. domestic economy, showing the precipitous decline in the agricultural and manufacturing sectors and the rise of the knowledge economy. In addition, if we look more broadly, the knowledge and technology-intensive industries account for nearly 40% of U.S. gross domestic product, and this happens to be the highest concentration among major economies. You can see on this slide on the right hand the list of the knowledge and technology-intensive sectors in the United States. These industries share a couple of characteristics. They have relatively high rates of growth, and they continue to grow even during the last recession. These industries also incorporate high technology, either in their services or in the delivery of services, or they spend a large share of their resources on research and development, and they make products that contain or embody technologies developed through R&D. Knowledge and innovation are really driving these industries more than in others. The 5 high-tech manufacturing industries represented here report rates of product innovation at least double the U.S. manufacturing sector average. And in the non-manufacturing sector, software firms were the leading innovators, with 69% of companies in that industry reporting the introduction of new products or services, compared to a 9% average for all non-manufacturing firms. So it should not be surprising that the U.S. knowledge and tech-intensive industries have a higher than average share of educated and skilled workers. Here, you can see the percentage of employees in each industry represented by knowledge worker occupational groups, such as management, business and financial, STEM, science, technology, engineering and math, legal, and so on. And you can begin to see that the share of the jobs in each industry that typically requires an associate's degree or higher. In both cases, the knowledge worker and educational intensity of KTI industries is higher, or significantly higher, than in manufacturing and the U.S. average generally. And keep in mind that these knowledge and technology-intensive industries account for nearly 30% of U.S. employment. Now let me turn to the second megatrend I outlined at the beginning of my presentation. Riding the wave of transformation brought about by globalization and the digital revolution, billions of people in emerging economies have entered the global commerce and swelled global labor pool. The effective global labor supply has quadrupled between 1980 and 2005, so this data is already 10 years old, with most of the increase occurring after 1990. For example, if you look at the 4 BRIC nations, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, they now represent 45% of global labor supply, compared with less than 20% for the OECD. And today, many educated and skilled people in emerging economies are competing to perform the world's work, often for lower wages than their counterparts in advanced economies like the United States and Korea. Employers are accessing this global labor pool through many sources and many channels, including offshoring or establishing new foreign operations, moving routine, rule-based work that can be digitized over telecommunications networks, assembling global product teams, and through temporary immigration. Outsourcing overseas has been attractive primarily for jobs involving routine tasks, while high-value work often requires creative interaction among employees, among teams, in which physical proximity and the ability to engage personally offers comparative advantage. Perhaps nothing is having as more profound an impact as more disruptive an impact on the economy and the nature of work today than the digital revolution, our third megatrend. It has also underpinned globalization, global competition for the world's work, and provided the means for emerging economies, and in fact for all economies, to access the world's businesses, supply chains, markets, and jobs. And of course, this digital revolution, this increased information and technology capacity, is a principal driver for innovation itself. iPhones today contain more compute power than the most powerful and advanced supercomputers of the 1970s and 1980s at a fraction of the cost. And according to Deloitte, since the advent of the microchip, the topple rate, that's the rate at which companies switch leader positions within their own industry sectors, has increased by nearly 40%. Here, you can see the tremendous growth in size of the US private investment in information processing equipment and software since 1990, with average growth of investment about 9% annually over that period. And during the same period, you can see an incredible growth in internet and mobile phone users, not only in the United States, but globally. So I wanted to share the arc of the history here and the data. Increasingly, work and the workplace are online, on the go, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Manufacturing is also reorganizing production, becoming less labor-intensive and more capital-intensive, shedding jobs along the way. As the cost of labor rises and the cost of automation declines, it becomes more attractive to automate work and eliminate jobs. And this chart really does show sort of the rise of robots, the rise of machines, mapped against the declining manufacturing employment levels in the United States. Machines, autonomous systems, sensors, software, all of these are increasingly capable of doing routine tasks that have made up jobs for millions of people over the past 5 decades. For example, internet systems provide customers with account information and payment processing. Tax preparation software carries out work once performed by accountants. Computers, sensors, imaging technologies combined all perform security functions once performed by security guards. And in manufacturing, labor's share of inputs to multi-factor productivity has been dropping for the past 2 decades, while purchased business services and capital investments, such as information technology, have been on the rise. Thus, technology, it appears, it tends to favor those with higher skills. Higher skilled workers use technology to enhance their capabilities. For example, taking advantage of compute power to write, to perform research, to design products, and to deliberate with others, while lower skilled workers perform tasks easier to automate or tend to use technology that reduces the skills necessary to do the job. A new phase of the digital revolution is now kicking into high gear. The physical world and the virtual world are converging across numerous dimensions through sensors, networks, and data. All human activity, everything we do that can be measured, are being quantitatively characterized today. We are connecting people and things on a scale once completely unimaginable. The Internet of Things truly is becoming the Internet of everything, as it stretches across a multitude of human endeavors. The merging of the digital with the physical will provide unprecedented levels of insight, control, and optimization that together will lead to a deep revolution in productivity and entirely new ways to manage our resources, to manage production, to manage services, work, and our lives. The applications are mind-boggling. Smart agriculture, smart industry, smart infrastructure, smart stores, smart food packaging, smart buildings, smart clothing. Smart manufacturing has the potential to be truly revolutionary. Imagine what we could do with the data that illuminates the operation of every machine and every device, that monitors the cut of every blade, every movement of any material, the consumption of energy minute by minute, second by second, unprecedented insight from monitoring, control, and the optimization of all aspects of manufacturing. The Internet of Things will enable unprecedented control of the supply chain, and the value of the insight that's created by this convergence will extend far beyond the factory or the firm. Numerous economic actors can leverage the data and the insight. Lower tier suppliers, service suppliers, economists, insurers, investors. All of this innovative fervor may drive significant and deep changes to America's, and indeed to the world's, productivity potential. However, it's important to note this is still to come. One of our greatest challenges, and perhaps one of our greatest opportunities, is to translate this innovation into the productivity gains that history has shown can underpin greater wage gains and a better standard of living and quality of life for everyone, but that's still to come. Digitization, the proliferation of networks, and cheap digital transactions are opening doorways wide to an entirely new class of innovators, creators, and makers. New innovation ecosystems are emerging outside the traditional system of institutions of research and innovation. These systems support independent innovators and stretch across ideation and invention, financing, manufacturing, and partnership brokering. Open innovation platforms are providing places and processes that connect people, that connect innovation seekers with problem solvers, offering new ways to get more people innovating on their own or together. Dozens of these platforms have sprung up and emerged. Corporations are using them, and there are many intermediary platforms. We are also beginning to see, importantly, the democratization of financing for innovation, embodied in a global web-based crowdfunding movement characterized by such sites as Kickstarter, EquityNet, and Crowdfunder. The internet disrupted and disintermediated and democratized publishing, broadcasting, and communications. With hundreds of millions of people now new participants in this endeavor, with podcasts, blogs, Instagram postings, YouTube video, Facebook postings, web pages. And what happened in cyberspace on the web is now beginning to happen in the real world, in digitally enabled push-button manufacturing. The tools of production are now available to individuals in disruptive technologies, like cheap 3D printers under $1,000, prototyping tools, laser cutters, easy-to-use design software, off-the-shelf electronics, and desktop machining tools, and the list goes on. And all of these technologies, together or independently, are changing the economics of production. Who can be a manufacturer? Who can be an innovator? And putting the power of production into the hands of the masses. An individual innovator that can design and make a product today without owning any of the traditional manufacturing infrastructure. No warehouses, no inventory, no assembly line, no power lifts, no forklifts, in fact, really no heavy equipment, no inventory. Things can be made through microfactories or Kinko's-like tech shops or using small production contracts. It used to be almost impossible, extremely cumbersome, and involving bank transfers, letters of credit, and purchase orders just to engage a production facility line in China. But now you can do that with a text message, an email, a credit card, and a PayPal account. And digital channels such as Quirky, eBay, and Etsy are all emerging and are used to market and sell to the world. The economics of transaction costs are being turned on their head, and people are gaining similar power, similar leverage as large corporations. The traditional linkages between innovation and invention, capital and production are being completely severed. It is becoming possible today for someone to imagine, to develop, to deploy, and to scale an innovation independent of conventional institutions of innovation. And with these new models, barriers to entry are falling. Crowds are moving in, and it's possible that a disruptive force, unlike we have ever seen, is about to be unleashed. The collective power and potential of millions of innovators around the world. This is a stunning development with tremendous economic and social potential. Today, the development and application of many new technologies, development of many new products and services, and many emerging fields are multidisciplinary in nature. In addition, many of the global challenges that we have to address are multidisciplinary in nature themselves. Global food, clean water, energy security and sustainability. All of these require interaction among multiple fields such as engineering disciplines, economics, the environmental sciences, social and behavioral sciences. We are really living and working in a world of convergence. Let me illustrate the power of multidisciplinarity with one example: the fusing of agricultural science, data science, and electrical engineering. Today, there are large warehouses, some as large as 30,000 square feet structures, that are essentially indoor farms. They grow foods like lettuces or other vegetables with special nutrient formula, tunable LED lighting, and microclimates that are all designed to optimize production. And look at the results: a deep advance and leap in productivity, better food, incredible water savings, and greater sustainability across the board. Developing innovations for today's market opportunities and today's market challenges requires people trained to travel across diverse fields of knowledge and technology. This is very different than the traditional single discipline model that we have used to train our scientists and engineers and entrepreneurs over the past 50 to 100 years. Although we are now beginning to see some changes taking place at universities, and many companies and corporations have already moved to multidisciplinary teams, multidisciplinary innovation teams, because the problems faced by their customers and the opportunities in the marketplace demand this. And our fifth megatrend is rapid technological change. Technology is diffusing at ever-increasing rates. It took 75 years for the telephone to connect 50 million people, but only 38 years for the radio, 13 for television, 4 years for the internet, but the pace has only accelerated. It only took 50 days for the Draw Something app to reach 50 million people, and only 38 days for the Angry Birds app to reach 50 million people. So time is compressed in an unbelievable manner. So what does this all mean? What are the impacts on the labor force in our countries? One of the most fundamental impacts we are grappling with is labor market polarization. Demand is growing for high-end workers involving non-routine cognitive tasks and low-skill, high-touch workers, but it is weak for many middle-skill workers. Some economists attribute this gap to skill-biased technological change. For example, an increase in the value of workers' performance, whose performance is enhanced by IT, something I talked about earlier in my presentation. Workers who perform non-routine, abstract thinking and creative tasks with computers complementing the effort. Non-routine, manual jobs that require little formal education but require skills for in-person interaction and hands-on tasks. These are hard to outsource. These are hard to automate. But in the middle are those with intermediate skills performing routine, procedural, rule-based tasks subject both to offshoring and to automation. So the shift from routine jobs to non-routine jobs is spreading across the economy, intensifying the polarization of employment opportunities, yes, in the United States, but I would argue increasingly across the world. This is reflected on this chart as we look at employment growth by educational attainment in the United States, with rising fortunes over time for the well-educated and falling fortune for those with less education. And in this chart, you can see the dramatically widening wage gap between those with a higher education, those with higher skills, and those with less education in the United States. And here you can see how much the wage premium is for the better educated, as well as the stark differences in unemployment rates between those with different education levels. And in conclusion, we see that rapid technological change is having an impact at every level of the economy. When we think about technology's impact on jobs and workers, we tend to think about it based on where we sit. A worker might think about this in terms of the technology and the skills needed to perform a particular task. A manager might think about it in terms of how IT can be used to better organize work. A head of human resources at a company might look at how the need for technical skills is changing the occupational mix for the entire industry or for the company. While an economist might look at technology-driven employment growth and decline across different industries. The fact is simple. Disruptive technologies and innovation can drive a reordering of every level of the economy, from the workplace to the labor market to the mix of industries in a community or in a country, creating new opportunities for some, but also hardship for others. The process of reorganization may create new jobs while eliminating others and create new occupations or change the occupational mix, the tasks that have to be performed, and the skills that are in demand. Every New Year's Day in Washington, D.C., our area newspaper, the Washington Post, puts out a famous what's in and what's out list. So I'm going to borrow that model here to illustrate how technology really can impact labor at every level of the economy, with skills, job opportunities, occupations either being in or out. For example, due to networking, email, and social media, asynchronous communications are in, meetings are out. Due to computing and networking technology, network administrators and help desk personnel are in, file clerks are out. Due to horizontal drilling and seismic imaging, employment in the oil and gas industry is in. But due to email, online bill paying, and automatic mail sorting, postal service employment is out. And due to automation in manufacturing, robot maintainers are in, assembly line workers are out. Higher skilled workers are more able to navigate and thrive in this era of rapid economic and global change. Higher skilled workers are not only a premium when new technologies are introduced because they are better able to use them, they are also better prepared to move to new industries, to new jobs, to new occupations, new opportunities when they are displaced by technological or labor market disruptions. So what of the future? On this chart, we can begin to see where job growth is expected to take place in the United States in the decade to come. In essence, it's all about the post-secondary education. We can see there is faster job growth expected in occupations that require higher level education and training. Essentially, we are moving from a brute force to a brain force economy. As national leaders begin to understand the implications of these trends, the question facing the United States is pretty simple. Is our education system equipped to prepare the workers for the coming century, for this new reality? And the answer today is also very simple: no. The Council on Competitiveness, along with one of our members, Northeastern University, recently conducted a higher education outcomes survey of the American population, of public and business leaders. The survey revealed that more than half of all Americans say that U.S. higher education is not in tune with today's job openings and opportunities or the job market, and that it is not preparing graduates accordingly. Educators, policymakers, and groups like my own at the Council on Competitiveness have their work cut out for them. But history makes me optimistic. This is not the first time the United States has had to manage turbulent waters. More than 100 years ago, the American society reorganized around the industrialized age. Americans left farms. We built an industrial enterprise. We built roads and infrastructure to move an expanding range of mass-produced goods. People learned new skills, and government policies did shift to support this new kind of economy. At the time, forward-thinking educators and policymakers established compulsory education, and through a piece of federal legislation known as the Morrill Act, they created institutions of higher education in every U.S. state. And by the middle of the 20th century, manufacturing was driving the U.S. economy. Schools, colleges, universities, in concert with forward-thinking federal policy, once again rose to the challenge of training a labor force for a new future. And by the middle of the 20th century, nearly half of American men attended college or received vocational training through the GI Bill, which is widely credited with creating America's post-World War II middle class and driving record levels of growth and innovation, productivity, and employment. But here we are again in an era of turbulence, transition, and transformation. And if past is prologue, the United States will reorganize and reorient in this new age and come out stronger and more resilient. But this will depend on more than just reform of our educational system. Broader conversations still need to happen, and I think the forum here today and yesterday is part of that broader global conversation that will have to take place around what's critical beyond formal education to the success of the future workforce development. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, we have to give Mr. Chad Evans once again big applause. Yeah. In fact, I was sitting here and listening to Mr. Evans, Chad Evans' lecture. I came across two words here. He gave us deep productivity revolution and also democratization of innovation. I was thinking these two trends very much, but today I do have a lot of insight from you. Thank you very much once again. And I hope you will have many questions. There are question papers here, so you can write your questions and then give the question papers to the staffs. And we can use those questions at the end of the Q&A session, right? So please, the questions will be the simpler, the better, I guess. So I can use those questions for the dynamic Q&A sessions. Okay, now let's move to the next speaker. Another Evans, Mr. Paul Evans. Let me introduce Mr. Paul Evans, who will provide us many fruitful insights from the lecture titled Top Talent Management in Emerging Markets. Paul is Shell-chaired professor of human resources and organizational development at INSEAD. Do you know INSEAD? Must be, right? One of the most famous university in the world, I guess, right? And he was chosen as most influential thinkers in human resources, most recently in 2013 and 2014. Now, let's welcome Mr. Paul Evans with big and warm applause.
Well, let me just start off by saying that I'm very glad that I flew in early to start off, attend the very beginning of this conference, because it's proving to be not only very well organized, but an excellent window into the different facets of what we're all concerned with, getting a global perspective on talent. At a time, and I think Chad was making the point very graphically, as other speakers have done, and I think as we all must be aware of in the room, that we're at the time of one of these inflection points. Whether you call it, the Industrial Revolution 4.0 there, or whatever it is. It's a time of very, very significant change where talent is absolutely at the heart of things. Now, I'm going to give a kind of complementary talk, same sort of track but different perspectives to Chad, because I'm going to focus, as you know from the title, particularly on emerging markets rather than on the United States. And my background is in talent management with multinational organizations there. So I'm going to be focusing less on the economic, technological perspective and more on the talent issues. Now, what I want to do is three things. Give you the big picture on what we call talent competitiveness. And secondly, still at the big picture level, I want to give you three kind of big picture lessons in terms of what this means coming out of our analysis and work and research at INSEAD, in Europe, in Singapore, at our different campuses around the world. And thirdly, within the limits of time, I've picked out 6 lessons, particularly with multinational corporations in mind, in terms of managing talent in emerging markets. Now, starting point is this. It's a project that I started heading up with a colleague who's a former director of the World Bank, who is the pioneer of the Global Innovation Index, because we have another index at INSEAD measuring, I think the most authoritative index measuring innovation, where Korea does very well. And a few years ago, 3 years ago, we had an opportunity from discussions in Singapore, actually. We were hearing from Goh Chok Tong yesterday, who's been one of the major players in the development of Singapore, Prime Minister for many years of Singapore, about Singapore's development. And people in Singapore were saying, look, our only resource is our talent, is our people. We think we're doing fairly well, but we've got no way of measuring ourselves and comparing ourselves in a rigorous way with other countries. And again, measurements kind of leads to beauty contests. It's not just the measures, but it's the debates and the dialogue which drives action, which is really what's important. So since we have at INSEAD a certain reputation and expertise in building these indices, I got called upon. People said, look, Paul, you're Mr. Talent. Why don't you head this up with a group of other colleagues? And that's what gave rise to the Global Talent Competitiveness Index. And how do countries perform and how can they do better? Just to give you a very brief overview of what this is about. I mean, it's research which is undertaken by INSEAD. You need some funding and some support, so we have a partner in Singapore, which is the Human Capital Leadership Institute in Singapore. And we have another partner, which is ADECO, which is the world's largest leading provider of HR solutions. And we're trying to move to measure talent at the city level in the future, complementing the measurement of countries, and other partners will be coming on board. We have advisory councils, networks, and so forth there. And this index, composite index, gets rigorously audited by an independent office, which is actually the statistical office of the European Community of the EU in Brussels every year. And we're coming up into our 3rd year of this index now. Let me show you the model which lies behind this. Now, what's important behind this model here is that we're getting, different facets of talent competitiveness at this conference. What we're trying to do in this is to pull all of the different facets together in one model. And I think some of the choices that we made at the outset have proved in the last there. On the horizontal axis, you've got GDP per capita. The bubbles are countries. You can't see them. It's all too small. But you see the tiny little dot up at the top, which is Singapore and Luxembourg. You see the big bubble in the middle, which is China. Another big bubble lower down, which is India. And then, if I press the button, that's Korea. And the countries which are off that curve are countries which have a fiscal surplus, typically because they have a lot of oil or natural resources. Countries like Qatar, but you see this very close relationship that we all believe in between the quality of talent, broadly defined and measured, and the level of economic development. Since I'm going to talk about emerging markets, particularly with Asia in mind, that's the portrait of Asia. And you have to bear in mind that this is a log scale at the bottom. If you took, a straight scale, Singapore would be, way off the graph, and you couldn't represent it there. And you see China, India, I think you can see that, and some of the other countries, Cambodia and so forth there. Philippines, Malaysia, coming up close, moving up very fast there. Also mobilized by its kind of rivalry with Singapore. Just one other slide there, that's in terms of growing talent, that's the Asian ranking. There, the numbers there are actually the overall score. I should have put the numbers in terms of their strength, in terms of the growth pyramid there, but you see Singapore, Japan, Korea very well placed in terms of growing talent, but with the strengths and weaknesses that I was referring to a few moments ago. Now, let me move on to give you 3 big picture kind of lessons that come out of our work and analysis during the last few years in terms of, particularly with emerging markets in mind. Now, the first one I think I've said enough about. It's the renaissance of vocational education there. You've got Philippe Könegi here. I think he's giving a talk on this as part of a panel this afternoon. He's the former Minister of Education in Switzerland. He heads up the vocational education sector, and I think at least the discussions that I had with him, very worth going along to hear what he has to say. Bear in mind, and this goes very deep, it's hard to transpose into another country. In Switzerland, at the age of 12, you have to start thinking of what you want to do with your life. You have to start thinking in terms of employability. At age 15, you have a choice of whether you go on the generalist route, which is going to lead you to university, or whether you go on the vocational route, which is not just butchers and bakers, it's bankers, it's software developers, it's all sorts of different areas there. And 70% of the Swiss adolescents choose the vocational track and not the generalist track. And one of the very important issues is that that doesn't rule out going to university at a later stage in your life, because university isn't just 20 to 24 years old. You can go back to university or higher technical institutes and so forth there when you're 30, when you're 35. It's a very different educational system. And at least by our measures, and I mean up to you to judge, find out the data and so forth there, it's one which is worth thinking about. Second, and this is particularly important for emerging countries. If you take the Taiwan story, which many of you are familiar with, Taiwan experienced this enormous brain drain 50 years ago of people who went to Silicon Valley and so forth there. And then the Taiwanese government, very sensibly with hindsight, instead of investing in top universities, invested in vocational education which would benefit the whole population. And then they invested in science parks and so forth there. And they made a very attractive environment to lure back all those people who were doing pioneering things in Silicon Valley, and it created basically the platform for the electronics industry, which then started to develop Taiwan and so forth, and then the whole of the Taiwan manufacturing industry in China and so forth there. Returnees coming back in an attractive vocational environment there. That really moves onto the next big picture point that I'd make, which is very important from emerging countries. The Taiwan story, which India and China are trying to capitalize upon at the present period of time, is India and China have large numbers of people, as you know, being educated and working in the United States. Some of them come back prematurely and they don't have the depth of skills and experience which allow them to replicate that. I'll make a point, sometimes they, in a few moments, another point, sometimes they find the local environment to be less receptive and less attractive to them. So it really doesn't work out. But the argument of the world that we've moved into is not one of brain gain or drain. There's a woman called Saxenian at Berkeley who coined the expression brain circulation. And I think that's what we have to keep in mind in terms of development. Bear in mind, for example, when you think of brain circulation, that remittances, the money which is sent back home by people who are abroad in India, in Central America and so forth, is bigger as a total amount than the whole of foreign aid to developing countries. And some of that goes on consumption, but a lot of that goes on investing in education for your children, so they may perhaps be able to go abroad and get a good education. You've got the returnees, you've got the network effects. I mean, and that's one of my 5 final points here, this world that we've moved into where people have to circulate. Now I've got one other big picture point before I get into some of the concrete issues around multinational corporations. You've got to make it attractive to people to come back. You know, you've got to have an attractive environment. And there's 2 researchers at Stanford and London, Nick Bloom and John Van Reen, who've been doing some very interesting work which basically says management practices in a country do matter in terms of attracting talent, which is something that a lot of us feel. I mean, their interest in this, as economists, is they believe, this is their fundamental belief, that management practices are fundamentally important to what Chad was talking about, to productivity. And by the way, when I say management practices, they've got very good measures of this. 80% of their measures are around talent management, people management. It's around setting goals and targets. It's around attracting people and making sure that you've got the best people in the right places rather than friends and family. It's about the way you measure performance. It's about what you do with underperforming people. Are you professional in the way in which you manage people? And unfortunately, I mean, I meant last night to find the data on Korea and had an interesting discussion with somebody else and completely forgot about it, my apologies. But I think Korea's you know, somewhere kind of in the middle. It's certainly not at the top of that listing, with the United States way up at the top here. Now, if I use our GTCI data, just let me show you one graph from data that we're working on at the moment. A little hard to understand because this is three-dimensional, but just to illustrate the point from our data. The colors represent how attractive that country is to talent. And these are survey measures of business leaders produced by the World Economic Forum. And the red countries are countries which are attractive to talent. The blue countries are unattractive to talent. And the two dimensions which are here are scores on professional management. And this is, do you give a job in your country to people because they're competent, because they're the best people, or do jobs in your country go first and foremost to friends and people that you're close to and members of your family? And what you see is that the professional companies, the professional organizations, the professional countries, since this is country level, are the ones which are in the red zone, which are attracting talent. And the other dimension is, to what extent in your country do organizations invest seriously in employee development, in coaching, in training, in developing their employees? And again, you see, the more that is the practice in the country, the more attractive that is to talent. So I think one of the areas that we've got to kind of put on the table is the quality of the management practices. And I think Jeff Pfeffer was getting at some of this a little bit. I wasn't at his talk there yesterday afternoon in what he was saying. Now, from that, let me begin to head towards my conclusion with, I think I've got 5 or 6, I may not get through all of them, lessons, particularly from the corporate point of view, about management talent, particularly in emerging markets. First thing I'd say is, you've got to understand local practices, but then you've got to differentiate yourself. You've got to be different. And there's a fine balancing act between that. I mean, an example that I would give from next door, from China and so forth, is we all know Haier, highly successful company in the global appliance industry across the world. Its ways of managing performance, which go under the heading of OEC, overall, that means everybody and in the company, everybody in the organization, all aspects of performance have to be considered. Every means every day and everybody, and control and clear means you've got to finish up all your tasks by the end of the day. You can't put it off. And they've got a very non-SOE, very world-class system for managing performance there, but with distinctive Chinese properties. For example, one of their practices is the highest performers get invited as employee of the month to a dinner with the, at least until recently, with the founder of the company, the owner of the company. But not just the employees, the parents above all of the employees. And the company in the town where the person grew up get a lot of press, newspapers, and so forth about that particular individual. Very different from many other Chinese companies, but very Chinese in its orientation. And if we had time, the interesting thing to discuss is how can those practices be transferred to its plants in South Carolina and so forth in the United States. Second point that I want to make is we've got a skills gap in emerging countries, as we all know, across Asia. Our observation about closing the skills gap is that it happens fast and well when business gets together with municipalities or governments and gets together with educational institutions to do something about closing that particular gap. And we can find many stories. I mean, if I wanted to look at leading HR companies, rather than looking at Europe or the United States these days, I find, or we find, our best example, for example, among some of the Indian leading companies, Infosys, Tata, and so forth there. You know, Infosys, how do you develop an industry where you need people who the market isn't producing? Well, getting together with municipalities, getting together with educational institutions to attract the right people and to train and to develop them. Singapore's former Prime Minister was talking yesterday about one of the areas of capability that Singapore has, which is in the service of the aircraft engine industry. And that didn't exist beforehand. Rolls-Royce wanted to set up a service facility in Asia and got together with support from the Singapore government, with support from technical institutions, and within a 2-year period of time built up a training, hiring, talent, development machine where now today you've got first-class resources in that particular area which Singapore is very proud of, which you didn't have 10 years ago. So it's these sorts of ecosystems, as I think a lot of people are saying. Now, thinking about top talent in the last point, particularly people in middle and more senior positions there. Next point that I'd make is it's very important to capitalize on the thirst of Asian millennials, young people. And you can judge this yourself, people in the room, because many of you are indeed millennials there. The thirst for development in their jobs. Question that at INSEAD, in partnership with Universum, we've been researching recently, what's the single biggest fear of the generation who are aged 21 to 32 today? And the answer which comes out, and particularly in Asia, this is true across the world, is being stuck in a job with no development opportunities. I mean, George Yip was talking about it when he was talking about innovation in China yesterday. If you're going to retain people, you've got to be very good at this area of management practice. They're taking employee development seriously. Just a side comment, in the leadership development area, GE is a company in the United States which gets a lot of attention, and it's known for its rank and yank practices. I think it's worth pointing out the changes which are happening in GE in the way it goes around developing managers. The key thing today is an app which all high potential people have, and through that app you've got big challenging stretch goals and so forth. You can get coaching, you can get support, you can hook into networks, trying to help people, develop people, coach them in, taking on big challenges, getting the help, the support, and so forth, so you can really pull it off. And I think that's kind of the sort of way ahead that we're starting to see. Last couple of points. I mean, capitalize on the desire of people, especially if you're looking in your talent in companies, to collaborate with people abroad. I mean, just if you look at the US data here, PwC had a survey recently which said that 71% of the young talent in the United States want to work internationally. One of the developments that I'm finding interesting is the growing number of talent swaps, which is basically within the same country, you've got somebody in Korea, here in Korea, and somebody in New York. They've got equivalent jobs, and for several months, they swap jobs. And you have to coach the other person in how to do well because you're going to go back into that job. And it's something which is incredibly attractive and incredibly developmental. And I think we're going to see more and more of these sorts of patterns and so forth starting to develop. Last couple of points. By the way, this I have to say a word about. Since my final point is going to be back on this world of brain circulation. I have long believed that leaders should have international experience. And we're starting to get solid, rigorous research. One of my colleagues at INSEAD, working together with researchers in the United States and in Hong Kong, what they do give to people is a creativity test, a problem-solving test. You got 15 objects and you've got to stick them on the wall, and there's no obvious way of doing it. You have to think laterally, out of the box, good at problem solving. Folks, you give that problem to people who have never worked outside their home country, and probabilistically, they won't solve it. You give that creativity test, problem-solving test, to people who I've always called international business tourists. You know, they travel a lot, but they've never had deep experience abroad. Probabilistically, they can't hack it either. You give that test to people who have in-depth experience in another country, and they will solve it. And I think it's getting at what other people are talking about here, which is kind of the diversity of experience that people need. It's interesting hearing some of the speakers here talking yesterday afternoon about how we can give this to adolescents and so forth there, starting off at an early age. We're getting more and more evidence, if you like, that international experience really does change the mind. Perhaps one of my last slides here, there's been a lot of discussion on a very important issue here, which is the need to be T-shaped. You need deep expertise, professionalism, have an impact, but you've got to be able to collaborate. You need the top of the T, the breadth, the multidisciplinarity. I, for 30 years, have used the metaphor of a split egg or a matrix in my work, and that's my split egg. And it says, particularly in everybody in a company, this used to be up at the top, but now it's going down fast. And it's what's important to bring into emerging markets there. 20th century, the bottom of the egg, that's your job, your targets, your objectives. It was 99% of everything that you did, even if you were a high potential person. And then there were people up there innovating big projects. How do we get into new markets, develop new products, and so forth there? So there was them and us. Not today. That's too slow. That's too expensive. This is today's model. I've got to do my job very well. I've got to have the depth, the professionalism. I've got to deliver the results today. The bottom of the egg. You don't do that well, some companies you get fired. You certainly don't go ahead. But you don't get promoted for that. It's only about 70% of your time. You're spending 30% of your time on projects, on new product development, on new ideas with other people in project groups, maybe with other countries, thinking ahead. That's what you get promoted for. So you get fired for the bottom of the egg, you get promoted for the top of the egg. We live in a world today, I think, of balancing acts. The picture that Chad was talking about is very real, but we've got to manage today as well as tomorrow. The bottom of the egg and the top of the egg. We've got this distinction in the English language that you don't have in any other language between management, doing things right, and leadership, doing the right things. Well, the bottom of the egg is management. The top of the egg is leadership. And the way I see organizations changing, be it in developed markets or emerging markets, is both of those. Managing the short term, the bottom of the egg, and the long term. Managing for performance and productivity today, the bottom, innovation tomorrow. It's kind of like vocational and creative skills go hand in hand. You have to have both of them. Same thing with people. I think we've got to get this split egg thinking. And one of the exciting things that I fear from people at this particular conference is some of them are saying we've got to start doing this when people are still in high school, if not earlier on. I'm going to skip over a next slide there. I mean, very quickly here. I mean, this was to do with leadership development, which is very important in emerging countries and very, very difficult. How do you identify with people with that sort of potential? I mean, one of the things that we know is that leadership requires different skills. There, Jeffrey Pfeffer was taking a fair knock at traditional ways of going about leadership development, but it's one of the major problems in Singapore and Asia. This is actually where, since this is an HR conference, I find that regional HR people have a very, very important role to play. The local HR people are too in the sands, the deep in the problems, to be able to have the perspective and so forth to be able to do this. The people far away are too far away. You need extremely good local people. Now, I said if I want to leave a final message in the air around all of this about our changing world, again, they're consistent with the sorts of things that I'm talking about, I'd say that the 21st century is this world of circulation. People moving abroad, circulating, that's where we get ideas, networks, and so forth. Talent is mobile. You know, people want to go, want to move there, move around. But that mobility also is what develops talent. And we've got to get this kind of circular process well in motion and well underway. Thank you very much.
For your excellent lecture on global talent, Paul Evans. And we do have some time limit with about 10 or 15 minutes. Will it be okay until 35? It's okay? All right. I do have 9 question suites from the audience. So I don't know whether we can deal with all these 9 questions altogether because we do have only 10 to 15 minutes. So I will give one question to Chad Evans first because Paul is a little bit tired. Okay. So Paul, this is the question from Hana High School. What skill or characteristics does an HR executive or corporate management should have to deal with such changes you mentioned? Maybe brief answers could be, yeah.
Great. Try to give a quick answer. I think actually Paul answered that question really nicely in his presentation. I think HR leaders need to really be thinking about not only the management practices, but ultimately employment potential, employee development. I think we see that increasingly important. I think Paul emphasized that. But I guess if I were to go a little, in addition, I would say that human resource executives need to be thinking about openness to change and openness to diversity. I think what we're learning in the research around innovation and competitiveness is that they are both driven by diverse thinking, diverse populations, and so I think human resource executives need to not only understand that and know it, but to put it into practice in their own firms. So I would say that's really critical, and that's been a learning. Well, many people have studied that, and it's really at the heart of a lot of the work of the U.S. Council. I would also say, and again, Paul emphasized this, I thought really well, human resource executives need to exercise flexibility, whether that's engaging and ensuring that global teams can work, creating the infrastructure to allow that sort of virtual working relationship. I think that's fundamental. And then I'll wrap by saying all of this has to take place in the context of a firm's overall strategy and business. So human resource executives cannot be divorced from the CEO, the chief operating officer, and others who are trying to drive the overall performance of the organization. Human resource issues and needs are board level issues. And so all of this has to be coupled to overall strategy.
Yeah, I add a quick comment, if I may, because I think your last point is the important one. I work a lot with HR people, but I have very ambivalent feelings sometimes, because it's got to be driven by the line. It's got to be driven by the chief executive, who needs a lot of support and so forth in order to be able to do it well. And it's interesting, since we've got a lot of heads of universities and so forth. I think of my time as a dean. I think of the role of the dean of INSEAD, and our only resources are talent, and 80% of what he's doing outside fundraising and so forth there is HR.
Thank you very much. And the other question from Suji High School is in Korean, so I will translate, even though my command of English is not that good, but I will communicate with the two Evans. It's about Switzerland. Paul, you said at the age of 12, Switzerland students are thinking about their jobs. And from the age of 15, they are choosing what they are going to do for the education, whether he or she is going to vocational education or not. Then the question is like this: how they can choose whether they should go to vocational education or higher general education. With all those informations, they don't know all the information they have. Yeah.
I would say that what's important, and again, you can talk with some of the experts who are here at the conference here, is you've got to realize it becomes a very scary choice if you're making it once and for all. There. You make a choice, you get some experience, for example, at a vocational school where you're working and studying at the same time. You can change direction later on. You can go back to university later on. What I'm against is the rigidity of the systems that we've set up, there, where, you have to get into a top university and so forth there. Your whole of your life is funneled in, it's everything, and then, you're going to have to change in the future. It becomes so scary, so stressful. And I think the Swiss have many more crossover paths into higher education, and that's kind of the model for the future.
Do the students know how can they decide which direction they should go?
Well, that's important, thinking about this at age 12, there. And at age 15, the interesting thing that happens there is they don't know, and they go to mummy, they go to daddy and say, what do I do? And you know what mummy and daddy, but again, you can test this out with the Swiss, what mummy and daddy say: look, Helmut, Maria, if you don't know what you want to do, take the safe choice, which is the vocational choice, the choice that 70 people. You're going to have a job, you're going to get experience, you're going to earn some money, And then if you figure out that you want to do something very different, when you're 21, 23, you can zigzag rather than having one path.
Professor, can I just add, I completely support everything Paul's saying. At some point, I think there has to be a fundamental acknowledgement. Many of these issues are built around deep-seated psychological, social, behavioral issues. If you look back at the history of the United States and other nations over the past 50 years, the middle class was really driven by a really deep and well-paying manufacturing base. If you ask parents in the United States today, would you like Sally to go work on the plant floor of a manufacturing facility? The answer might be no. Would you like Bob to go be a welder? The answer might be no. However, Sally or Bob would be making a higher salary through vocational training or other pathways than they would if they were in the liberal arts. That's not to say a liberal arts education is unimportant, but what I'm saying is people need to be prepared for flexibility, to Paul's point, and there needs to be some myth busting. There needs to be a look at what's really driving potential, and frankly, to allow for failure, and to Paul's point, creating non-rigid systems that allow for people to easily get back into education, whether it's to university or in another vocational training, a community college, and to not be so rigid. And a lot of that ultimately is about psychology too.
Thank you. And there is another question from FKI. This is in Korean, but it's related with this question and answers, because the Korea has got a different social climate, because most of parents do want their children to be lawyers or prosecutors or doctors, right? So to be like Switzerland, the Korean society should change their social climate or social culture. How do you think about this?
That is the question. I was discussing this with my daughter, who's an Oxford graduate and so forth, and she said, "Daddy, you go on about the importance of vocational education. What would you have done if I had said that I want to go to, vocational school?" It's deeply ingrained in our society, and that's the tough question there. I don't think you can become the Swiss, but it's again my issue about you've got to wrestle with this need and find solutions in your own way. I think just as an outsider, but with Korean friends, I found the question earlier on about making a choice very interesting, because making choices in the career of the past has been so scary, as it were. You get it wrong or something, you take a wrong step and you feel it's your life which is at stake. And I think there's some, taking that stress out, opening it up, bringing in more flexibility. Whatever you can do, learn from the Swiss, but their approach goes back to 1923, almost 100 years. And you're not going to be able to springboard that and change cultural values. So you've got to wrestle with this issue. It's what the Singapore Prime Minister was saying yesterday, I thought was very important. They have wrestled with a lot of these types of issues years and years and years. And he was talking about creating a multicultural population there. I think some of these issues you've really got to wrestle with yourselves.
I would just say at the end of the day, I think it's important for children to ask their parents what should they do. But there's also an element of personal responsibility and risk-taking. I think what society can do is to try to lower some of the hurdles to risk and to make it okay to fail and to provide many different options. Let's also look at the demographics. Countries like the United States, Korea, Japan, and others, they're going to live longer and you're going to work longer. So you need to have that understanding that it is unlikely you will have a single career, much less a job. You're going to have a lot of jobs, and you're probably going to have 1 or 2 or 3 careers. So you have to be able to work in that sort of environment. So I'm not saying ignore your mom and dad, but what I am saying is that you have to think about your own future, and where do you want to be in 20, 30, or 50 years, and to tool yourself for that reality. And frankly, I think as Paul really, illuminated quite nicely in his presentation, workers are increasingly engaged in a global economy. Yes, you're going to live and work in Korea. I'm going to live and work in the United States. But we have to also understand that those jobs and careers are in a global context, and that second career may not be in Korea.
It's also a related question from Jungang Daily News. It's about the Korean society as well, right? The Paul said the higher education may bring higher employment opportunities in future, right? But in Korea, the fact is like this. Highly educated people tend to be less employed, right? So they give up, the high school students give up higher education, or after university graduation, they go back to vocational training, something like. So what is your thought on this sad fact of Korean society?
Well, very quickly, I mean, I think it's that sort of phenomena that leads you to question the way you're doing things at the moment. It's that sort of phenomena which kind of starts off a process. Make no doubt about it, Korea has been tremendously successful there. You know, I was saying 29, but you know, in terms of the quality of education, in terms of the innovation, you score very high in terms of innovation. But there's a need, and the very question kind of gets at it, for change and evolution. Chad?
This is not, I think, a Korea-only experience. We see this in the United States, and I think many advanced economies see this. I think what's important, and I'll use maybe a quote, the sad phenomenon, is that I think it points to the fact that there needs to be a greater coupling, a better dialogue between higher education and industry, between vocational training and industry. We need to be training and educating people for relevant jobs. We often see in the United States, for example, we have things called workforce investment boards. These are led by our Department of Labor. They're regional and local workforce boards who help train people for jobs. When you look at the billions of US dollars that go into these workforce investment boards, they are training for jobs that no longer exist. Why are we investing in careers and jobs that don't exist? They're doing that because these workforce investment boards do not communicate with local industry, much less local education. So this gets back to one of the slides Paul had. It was a great sort of triptych. There needs to be better feedback loops between industry, education, policymakers around what's relevant, because then you can get over this sad phenomenon of training and educating people for a job that doesn't exist. This is something that is feasible and can be done.
Right, I think time went past by, so about less than 1 minute left. So I will give you 30 seconds to each, just one word for the audience. How can they be prepared to these challenges? Paul first, 30 seconds.
Sorry, I hadn't sort of got my head around things. All I'd say actually is that my research convinced me that people develop not through education, but through challenge. And you need a lot of support and coaching and so forth. And I come back to that time and time again. Their education's very important, but make sure that you know, get yourself a real challenge, you know, and some support and so forth. And one way or the other, that's what's going to get you on the road to personal and professional success.
I would applaud that. I think we all have a responsibility to inspire young people, ourselves, an older generation. This world faces tremendous global challenges, but huge opportunities. We have to solve this nexus of food and energy and water. We have global climate change. We have health pandemics. We have a lot of challenges and huge opportunities in the Internet of Everything. So what we need to do is to embrace those challenges and opportunities and create the non-rigid, in Paul's word, educational and human resource systems to allow individuals themselves and together to solve these challenges, to meet those opportunities. The more that we constrain, the less able we're going to be able to do that, to accomplish that goal. So I would say unleash that potential.
Okay, thank you very much. I think today I've got too many insights from these two events. I think the audience will agree with me. And thank you very much once again. And we should give them big, warm, and applause. Thank you very much for this session.